Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you are somewhere comfortable for this one.
Oh, definitely grab a blanket.
Yeah, maybe turn the lights down a little bit, get cozy. Because today we are heading into the study, sitting by the metaphorical fire, and things are going to get, well, a little bit spooky.
A little chilling? Yeah, but in a fun way. It really is a fireside chat kind of session today.
It is. And we are dealing with some wild concepts. We're talking ghosts, the actual architecture of reality, and the secret history of the world that happens entirely while you sleep.
Right, which sounds like fiction, but we're looking at this as a mechanical process.
Exactly. But before we get into the heavy lifting, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that feeling where the phone rings? I mean, back when people actually used landlines to call each other.
Right, the archaic ringing phone.
Yeah, and you knew exactly who it was before you even picked it up. Or you just get a sudden, random urge to check on someone. You call them, and they happen to be going through something major right at that exact second.
Oh, it is a classic experience. I mean, almost everyone has had it happen at least once.
Right.
We usually just write it off as coincidence, or maybe we call it good instincts.
There's intuition, that kind of thing. But what if I told you that that very same instinct is actually the exact same mechanic you use to see a ghost?
That is such a mind-bending pivot.
Right. And more than that, what if I told you that seeing a ghost is actually a do-it-yourself project?
That is the hook right there. The idea that a haunting is essentially a collaborative effort.
I love that phrasing so much, but I also kind of hate it because it sounds like a lot of work. Haunting is a collaborative effort. So let us set the stage properly for you.
Please do.
We are looking at session 253 of the early sessions, book 6 of the Seth material. The date of record for this one is April 25, 1966.
Which was a Monday night, actually.
A Monday night in 1966. And per our usual housekeeping, I need to make the mandatory declaration here. This deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
Absolutely. We are here to explore the material, not to sell it to you.
Exactly. But if you want the real deal, the full text, you know where to go.
Go straight to the source.
So our mission today is pretty massive. Seth, who is the entity speaking through the medium, Jane Roberts, is going to walk us through how we literally construct our reality.
And we need to emphasize, he does not mean that metaphorically.
No, not at all. He means how we build apparitions out of thin air, how our physical health is a direct mirror of our inner expectations, and this concept that honestly just gave me chills when I read it. Mass dreams.
Mass dreams. It sounds like a title for a sci-fi movie.
It really does. But it is better than a movie. It is a full explanation for how world history is actually determined.
It completely reframes how we think about war, politics, causality, everything.
Okay, so let's unpack this from the beginning. We start the session with Seth actually commenting on a book that Jane is reading, right?
Yeah, Arthur W. Osborn's book.
Right, it's called The Future Is Now.
It's really interesting that Seth starts off with what is basically literary criticism.
Yeah.
Jane was reading this book about precognition, the ability to see the future. And Seth uses this as a jumping off point to discuss exactly how we perceive information in the first place.
And he makes a point right away that precognition is not magic. It is something that happens constantly, just beneath our everyday awareness.
Exactly. He explains that knowledge of future events, past events, and present events is all just data. It is widely available data.
A broadcast.
Yes, it is like a radio signal that is always broadcasting. But most of the time, we are entirely tuned out.
We're just busy.
Right, we're intensely focused on our immediate physical reality, making dinner, going to work, but the data is still there.
It's like background noise that you only notice when the room gets quiet.
Precisely. The information's always flowing. It only bubbles up to the conscious mind, giving you that sudden aha moment or that weird flash of dread when specific conditions are met.
Usually when our regular psychological defenses are down, or when there is a really high emotional charge attached to the data.
Right. And Seth uses this baseline of how we receive data to pivot directly into the topic of apparitions, ghosts.
And this is where it gets incredibly interesting for me, and honestly a little confusing at first glance.
How so?
Because usually when we think of a ghost, we think of an external spirit. Like, oh, there's a ghost standing in the hallway.
Right, an objective thing.
Yeah, it is an object, entirely separate from me. If I walk out of the room, the ghost is still going to be there in the hallway. That's the pop culture definition.
That is the traditional view, definitely. The ghost is an object occupying space. But Seth flips the script on this entirely.
He really does.
He says, and I am paraphrasing a bit here, that all systems of reality are constructed by the perceiver. If you do not build it, you simply do not see it.
Wait, let's pause on that. You are telling me if I see a ghost, I am the one who built the ghost?
In a very literal mechanical sense, yes. Seth explains that apparitions are not just hovering around waiting to be spotted by someone.
Okay.
They have to be actively constructed by the observer in order to appear physical.
It really is like I ordered a ghost from IKEA and I have to assemble the parts myself before it can haunt me.
That is a surprisingly accurate analogy. Even if the ghost desperately wants to haunt you, you have to do the heavy lifting of building their body so that your physical eyes can actually register it.
That sounds exhausting. Why on earth would I do that?
Because your brain, your perceptive apparatus, is a construction engine. That is simply what it does with incoming data.
Okay, I see.
Seth breaks this down beautifully into two types of constructions, primary and secondary. I found this fascinating because it perfectly explains why some people see ghosts in the haunted house while others see absolutely nothing.
Let us look at the secondary construction first, because this one seems slightly more manageable to wrap my head around. Seth uses this analogy of Mr. A and his brother.
All right, so scenario A. Mr. A is sitting in his bedroom. His brother is miles away, and he is dying.
This is the classic crisis apparition scenario. We hear historical stories like this all the time.
We do. So the brother, in his final moments, thinks, I wish I could say goodbye to my brother.
And that thought is a telepathic message.
Exactly. It is not just a casual passing thought. It is intense emotion. It is raw energy. So Mr. A receives this message subconsciously.
So he gets the signal, like receiving a text message on your phone.
He gets the blueprint. Mr. A's subconscious mind takes that incoming data, the data saying brother wants to say goodbye, and it actively constructs a physical-looking image of the brother standing right there in the bedroom.
But the brother isn't actually there in the room.
Not in terms of his actual consciousness being present, no.
Mm.
The brother is miles away, taking his last breath in a hospital bed.
Okay, so Mr. A built a secondary construction based entirely on the telepathic message.
Yes, it is like receiving a text message from a friend and literally hallucinating the sender standing in your room reading it out loud to you.
So in this specific scenario, Mr. A is essentially just hallucinating.
Well, Seth would actually argue that all physical perception is a highly controlled kind of hallucination. You are always just taking data and turning it into an image.
Oh, that's a good point.
In this case, the data source happens to be telepathic, rather than light waves bouncing off a physical object. But the internal mechanism of seeing it is exactly the same.
Okay, so that is secondary. The brother is just sending a signal from afar. What is the primary construction?
Primary is where it gets a lot spookier. And this answers your earlier question about whether the ghost is actually real.
Let's hear it.
Scenario B. The dying brother actually projects his consciousness out of body. He travels directly to Mr. A's room. His consciousness is literally present in the space with Mr. A.
So in that case, the ghost is real. He is actually standing there.
The consciousness is real, the personality is genuinely there, but here's the kicker. Mr. A still has to construct the image to see him.
Wait, really? Even if the brother's consciousness is actually in the room?
Why? Because consciousness itself is not physical. It does not have skin or clothes or light-reflecting properties. It is pure energy.
Oh, right. Because physical eyes can only see physical things.
Exactly. To see the brother with physical eyes, Mr. A has to take that raw consciousness data that is present in the room and wrap it in a physical construction. He has to dress the ghost, so to speak.
That is wild. So whether it is just a telepathic text message or an actual out-of-body visit, the seeing part, the visual rendering, is always my job as the perceiver.
You are always the bricklayer. The blueprint might come from a telepathic text, which is secondary, or from the actual architect standing right in front of you, which is primary.
But either way, I lay the bricks.
Either way, you lay the bricks.
Seth has a quote about this that I highlighted in the source material because it really drives home the mechanics of this.
Go ahead and read it.
He says, sense images are built up, you see, in the same manner whether or not you are trying to perceive an apple, a star, or a human being.
That is the absolute key to this entire philosophy.
Yeah.
We usually think of imagination and perception as two entirely different things, right?
Yeah, imagination is internal, perception is external reality.
Exactly. But Seth is saying they are the exact same mechanic. You imagine the physical apple on your kitchen table just as much as you imagine the ghost in the hallway.
It is just that with the apple, everyone else in the room agrees it is there because there is a physical mass providing the data.
Yes. With the ghost, the data is telepathic, so only the person tuned into that specific frequency builds the image.
It really makes you wonder how much of our daily life is just a solitary construction project. Like, are we all just walking around in our own private, self-generated VR headsets?
Well, according to Seth, yes. We are constantly painting our environment into existence based on our expectations.
Which leads us perfectly into the next segment. Because if I am building ghosts based on my expectations and incoming data, what else am I building?
This is where the session shifts from spooky parlor talk to a bit of an existential crisis. Seth moves from apparitions directly to the nature of our physical reality itself.
He calls this next concept the closest thing to a basic truth.
He does. He says, you construct your physical universe and private environment in line with your inner expectations.
And he emphasizes heavily that he is not speaking symbolically here.
No, he says quite literally, the physical world is a direct mirror of the inner self. If your inner landscape is chaotic, your physical landscape inevitably becomes chaotic.
If you are full of fear, you build scary things.
Precisely.
And this is where we get into what Seth calls the danger of negative concentration. I think this is so relevant today, especially with the way we consume media.
Oh, without a doubt.
We call it doom scrolling now, but Seth calls it focusing on inequalities, disasters, and shames.
It is a really powerful warning for us. Seth explains that when you intensely concentrate on those negative things, you are not just passively observing them.
You are adding to their existence.
Yes, you are feeling them energy.
That is a very heavy responsibility to place on the individual. It almost feels like victim blaming, doesn't it? Like, if I look at a war on the news, I am actively helping the war continue.
I completely understand why it sounds that way, but it is not about blame. It is strictly about mechanics. It is about where you are putting your energetic fuel.
Okay, so it's impartial.
Very impartial.
Mm.
Seth describes this as a feedback loop. If you focus intensely on disaster, you reinforce the quality of disaster in your own private reality. But Seth points out it is actually a double loss.
How so? What's the double loss?
First, you reinforce the bad thing by concentrating on it. You give it validity and form. But second, you are using up the creative energy that could have been used to construct something good.
Ah, an opportunity cost.
Exactly. You rob yourself of the constructive qualities you could have been building in your environment instead.
It is like having a very limited budget for construction materials. If you spend your entire budget building a dungeon, you simply do not have any bricks left to build a garden.
Precisely. And Seth gives a very specific and honestly a somewhat chilling example of this, involving a mutual friend of theirs who had developed a tumor.
Yeah, and we definitely need to handle this carefully. We are not doctors, and we are absolutely not giving medical advice to anyone listening.
Right, this is an exploration of the text.
But we need to look at what the text actually says. Seth discusses a woman with a tumor, and his analysis of her situation is incredibly mechanical.
It is. He states that the tumor was formed by her inner concentration. She feared the concept of a tumor so strongly and focused her energies on the idea of illness so intensely that it existed in her mind long before it was ever physically constructed in her body.
So the intense fear was the actual blueprint for the illness.
Yes. And again, this is not about moral failure on her part. It is about the absolute neutrality of energy.
The energy just follows the focus.
Exactly. The energy does not judge if the focus is good or bad. Seth says, had she concentrated upon constructive elements, not only would the tumor itself be non-existent, but she would have constructed a positive element in its stead.
He explicitly mentions she could have built the spiritual growth instead of a physical growth.
That phrase, spiritual growth versus physical growth, is so fascinating. It implies that the raw creative energy is totally neutral.
It just wants to grow.
It just wants to expand and take form. You tell it how to grow based entirely on your focus, fear, or expansion. The energy does not care. It just diligently builds what you tell it to build.
It really makes you want to sit down and check your thoughts, doesn't it? Like, what am I accidentally building right now in my life just by obsessively worrying about it?
It is the ultimate mechanical argument against worry. We usually think of worry as a passive, harmless activity. I'm just sitting here worrying. I'm not hurting anyone.
Right.
But Seth says, no, you are aggressively constructing the very thing you are so afraid of. Worry is not just unpleasant. It is a highly creative act pointed in the wrong direction.
A creative act in the wrong direction. I am definitely going to write that down. It makes me think about how we constantly obsess over the things we do not want. Like, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to be broke.
And the universe or the energy only hears sick and broke. It takes that blueprint and gets to work.
Okay, so we have talked about personal reality, the ghosts we build, the tumors, our private environment. But then Seth zooms out, way, way out.
He really broadens the scope here.
He starts talking about mass dreams.
This is the massive transition of the session from the personal
Yeah.
to the political or the historical.
Yeah.
This is where the scope of the material just explodes.
What exactly is a mass dream, mechanically speaking? Is it just a bunch of us having the exact same nightmare on a Tuesday?
It is much deeper than that. Seth describes them as shared dream architectures that exist just above the layer that Carl Jung called the collective unconscious.
Jung's collective unconscious was essentially like a giant library, right? Symbols and archetypes that we all share as a species.
Right, it was passive, a repository of human experience. But Seth describes mass dreams as highly active. They're dynamic. He calls them world pictures.
World pic.
Yes. They are collective subconscious problem-solving sessions. Seth says these mass dreams help to actually form the reality of human conditions on the physical planet.
So before a major war happens or a massive social movement starts or a new technological invention changes everything, it happens in this shared dream state first.
Exactly. Seth says if you had the ability to perceive these mass dreams directly, you would literally see physical events being born.
That honestly gives me goosebumps. It implies that world history is not just a series of random, chaotic accidents. It is actively decided upon.
It completely challenges our fundamental view of causality. We always think event A causes event B. The assassination of the Archduke caused World War I.
Right, simple cause and effect.
But Seth is saying the mass dream caused both of those things. The psychological pressure built up in the collective psyche, the decision was made in the dream state that a global conflict was needed to resolve certain underlying issues, and then the physical events were simply scripted to match that decision.
So we are all literally scriptwriters in our sleep.
Effectively, yes. We are drafting the script of the world.
And here's where we get to the political aspect. Because Seth explicitly talks about world leaders in this context.
He does. And this feels very relevant to anyone who closely follows politics or history. Seth says that political leaders are born and known in the dream state by the masses long before they ever appear in physical reality.
So when a charismatic leader suddenly sweeps a nation, seemingly out of nowhere, and everyone wonders, where did this guy come from?
We already knew them. We met them in the mass dream.
Wow.
We vetted them, or we feared them, or we embraced them collectively while we slept. By the time they actually show up on a television screen, the collective decision has arguably already been made.
That is fascinating. It really explains that strange feeling of inevitability you sometimes get with huge historical shifts. Like, no matter what happens on the ground, this specific person is going to win because the wave behind them is just too big to stop.
It does explain that perfectly. It implies that the actual election happens in the dream world first. The physical act of voting is just a formalized ritual to ratify what the collective consciousness has already firmly decided.
But wait a minute. If that is true, it sounds like we as individuals are completely helpless. If the mass dream decides on a terrible war or an oppressive dictator, what can I possibly do? I am just one tiny person.
And this is where Seth drops what I think is the most important piece of information in the entire session, maybe in the whole book. It is about the immense power of the individual within these mass dreams.
Oh, the 1 versus 100 quote. This is the part I really wanted to get into.
Read it. It is incredibly powerful.
Okay, Seth says, one man, passionately willing, good or evil, can overbalance literally 100 men.
Passionately willing. That is the metric that matters. It is not about raw numbers of people. It is about the intensity of the focus.
So one single person who really, really means it
Can completely override the lukewarm, passive wishes of 100 people who just kind of want a different outcome.
That is both deeply inspiring and utterly terrifying at the same time.
It really is, because it explains why history is so often driven by fanatics.
Yeah.
People with absolute unwavering conviction, whether they are benevolent saints or absolute monsters, tend to shape reality because they are pouring exponentially more energy into their construction than the thousands of people who are just passively watching things happen.
It really emphasizes that we are not just helpless bystanders swept up in these mass dreams. If you have the intensity, you can actually steer the ship.
Or at the very least, you can tip the scales significantly. In the dream state, a vote is not just a check mark on a piece of paper. It is a burst of creative energy.
Right.
And a nuclear burst of passion easily outweighs 100 little candle flickers of mild preference.
So if you genuinely want to change the world or even just your local community, you cannot just kind of want it. You have to be passionately willing.
You have to be all in.
Okay, my brain is officially full of heavy philosophy right now.
Mhm.
We've established that ghosts are DIY telepathic projects, tumors are misdirected creative energy, and world history is a massive shared dream where the loudest, most passionate dreamers win.
It is a lot to take in for one sitting. It totally deconstructs the comforting idea of an objective, solid, predictable world.
Thankfully, Seth gives us a little bit of a break here, a change of pace, as it were, towards the end of the session. We move into what they call the in-stream experiment.
Yes. After dropping the absolute secrets of the universe on them, Seth casually pivots to what is essentially a remote viewing test.
Just for some context for you listening, Jane and her husband Rob were actively trying to see if Seth could describe what a professional contact of theirs, Dr. Instream, was doing at a very specific time in another location.
It is the parlor game aspect of the sessions, but it serves a very important functional purpose. It validates the source material.
Because it proves he isn't just making up untestable theories.
Exactly. It shows that Seth isn't just philosophizing. He can actually perceive physical data remotely.
So what did Seth actually see when he tuned into Dr. Instream?
He describes a few very specific, verifiable things. First, he mentions seeing a round sun or a bright lamp image. He suggests Dr. Instream might be staring directly into a light or perhaps having an eye examination at that moment.
Okay, pretty specific visual detail.
Then he sees a connection to music or a concert setting. He specifically mentions a seat located to the right of the center.
And then there's the object. This is where the detail gets really crazy to me.
He describes a small object kept in a pocket, a medal or a cross, but he specifies that it is squat in shape. He notes it has a dark color, grayish-green, with a distinct silver tinge to it.
And he even gives a specific historical date for it.
1874. He says the object is connected to the beginning of a specific tradition.
And he even takes a stab at a specific name attached to the context. Stedwick or Sedgwick.
And finally, a book nearby, a leather-appearing volume, brown-red in color, with cream or gold-tinged pages.
I just like how highly specific this is. He is not doing the fake psychic thing saying, I sense a vague presence or a letter M.
Sure.
He is outright saying, it is 1874, it is a squat cross in a pocket, and the pages of the book are cream-colored.
It perfectly demonstrates the inner senses that Seth talks about so often. He is not guessing. He is directly perceiving data that is not local to Jane's physical body. And he does it so casually. For him, it is just routine housekeeping.
It really grounds the abstract material. It reminds you that this isn't just unprovable philosophy. There is an actual mechanism of non-local perception happening here that can look at a specific metal in a guy's pocket miles and miles away.
Exactly. It bridges the gap between the grand mass dreams concept and the personal DIY ghost. It is all fundamentally just information processing.
Because if he can read the data of the metal,
then it makes perfect logical sense that Mr. A can read the data of a dying brother's telepathic call. It is all just a matter of tuning your inner receiver to different frequencies of available data.
So as we are coming to the end of the recorded session, we get a little moment of humor that I think perfectly captures the unique dynamic between Seth and Jane.
Oh, the question about dreaming. It is great.
Right. Jane, or Rupert, as Seth always calls her, had asked Seth why she never seems to dream about him.
Which is a fair question.
It is. You would think, given that he literally speaks through her body for hours every week, he would pop up in a normal dream now and then. I mean, they spend a lot of time together in this altered state.
And Seth's reply is just dry wit at its absolute finest.
He simply says, I do not dream of him either.
It is such a wonderfully human moment from a non-physical entity.
It really is. It is like he is saying, look, we work together, we have a good professional relationship, but let's not make it weird. I need my off-the-clock space too.
It humanizes the entity so much. It reminds us that there are distinct, separate personalities at play in these sessions. Seth is not just some fragmented part of Jane's subconscious mind. He clearly views himself as an entirely separate entity.
With his own life.
With his own separate dream life, his own distinct interests, and apparently absolutely no desire to dream about his human student.
It is a great little palate cleanser after all the heavy existential philosophy. So let us recap this deep dive into session 253 for you. We have learned that reality is, at its core, a construction site.
We have learned that ghosts are essentially telepathic blueprints that we actively build into visible images. You are the architect of your own hauntings.
We have learned that our physical health is a direct mirror of our inner focus, and that persistent worry is a genuinely dangerous building material.
And we have learned that world history is actively written in our sleep through mass dreams, where the passionately willing few can easily overbalance the passive many.
Which perfectly leads me to our final thought for the day. The provocative question for you, the listener, to take home and chew on.
I think it absolutely has to be about that passionately willing concept.
Agreed. If one the person, passionately willing, can overbalance 100 others, what exactly are you passionately willing into existence right now?
And the necessary flip side to that question. Are you accidentally building the very things you fear just by staring at them too hard?
Are you the architect of a beautiful garden or a dark dungeon? That is the ultimate question you have to ask yourself.
It certainly is. The tools are in your hands either way.
We want to make sure we give full credit where it is due. This amazing material comes directly from the Seth material, and it is published by the New Awareness Network.
This is incredibly deep, complex stuff. We are honestly just skimming the very surface here today. We highly encourage you to not just listen to our deep dive, but to go and study the source material yourself.
Absolutely. Go to sethsender.com/the early sessions. Pick up a book. Start reading. It is a rabbit hole completely worth going down.
It will fundamentally change the way you see everything around you.
Thanks for joining us by the fire today. We will see you on the next deep dive.
Good night, everyone.
And sweet dreams. Just be careful what you build in them. I am signing off for the deep dive.